Tom Miller wasn't supposed to be in Storage Room B that night. The old storage area in the basement of Fuller Quantum Research Center had been locked for years, but a water leak from the aging pipes had forced maintenance to break the rusty lock. As the night shift janitor, Tom got stuck with the cleanup duty. He didn't mind, though. At 45 years old, with graying hair and kind eyes behind his wire-rimmed glasses, Tom found peace in the quiet night shifts. The scientists who worked here during the day would probably be surprised to learn that their janitor had once been a promising physicist himself. But life had taught Tom that sometimes the simplest paths brought the most happiness. The storage room was a mess. Decades of forgotten equipment lay covered in dust, looking more like a museum of failed experiments than a proper storage space. Water dripped steadily from a crack in the ceiling, creating a small puddle near a stack of old filing cabinets. "What a mess," Tom muttered, pushing his cleaning cart through the narrow path between shelves. His flashlight beam bounced off various pieces of equipment, creating strange shadows on the walls. The air smelled of rust and mold, with a hint of something else, something that reminded him of ozone, like the air after a lightning strike. As he moved deeper into the room, his flashlight caught something that seemed out of place among the scientific equipment. Half hidden behind a broken oscilloscope was what appeared to be an old brass lamp. It looked like something from an antique shop, with intricate patterns carved into its surface. "Now what's something like you doing in a place like this?" Tom chuckled at his own joke as he reached for the lamp. The moment his fingers touched the metal, he jerked back in surprise. The lamp was warm, not just room temperature, but actually warm, like it had been sitting in sunlight, which was impossible in this windowless basement. Even stranger, he could feel a subtle vibration coming from it, almost like the hum of the particle accelerators upstairs, but much softer. Tom's scientific curiosity, dormant but never truly gone, sparked to life. He picked up the lamp carefully, turning it over in his hands. The brass surface was completely free of dust, unlike everything else in the room. The patterns carved into it seemed to shift slightly in the beam of his flashlight, though he told himself that had to be a trick of the light. As he examined it closer, he noticed what appeared to be writing along the base, in a script he didn't recognize. "Probably just an old prop from some demonstration," he said to himself. Still, something about it fascinating. Almost without thinking, he rubbed his cleaning cloth across its surface, trying to get a better look at the patterns. The lamp grew hot in his hands, not enough to burn, but definitely noticeable. The humming increased, and the air in the storage room seemed to become charged with electricity. Tom's first instinct was to drop it, but his hands wouldn't obey. The patterns on the lamp began to glow with a soft blue light. Then came the smoke, not dark or threatening, but silvery and luminescent, pouring from the lamp's spout in defiance of physics. It spiraled upward, forming a column that reached the ceiling before beginning to take shape. Tom watched, his mouth hanging open, as the smoke condensed into a human-like figure. Within moments, he found himself facing what appeared to be a woman floating several inches off the ground. Her skin had a slight silvery sheen, and her hair seemed to move as if underwater. She wore what looked like ancient robes that shifted between different shades of blue. She opened her eyes, entirely silver, with no pupils, and looked down at Tom with an expression that mixed boredom with mild contempt. "Well," she said, her voice echoing slightly in the cramped storage room. "Another human. How predictable. You may call me Rose." She crossed her arms and continued floating, looking around the storage room with obvious distaste. "I suppose you'll be wanting your 3 wishes then." Tom stood there, the cleaning cloth still in his hand, as his scientific mind tried desperately to process what he was seeing. After several long seconds, he managed to find his voice. I think we need to talk about the laws of physics first." Rose looked down at Tom with growing irritation. In her thousands of years granting wishes, she had met emperors who commanded vast armies, wizards who claimed to understand magic, and billionaires who thought they owned the world. But she had never been asked about the laws of physics. "The laws of physics," she repeated, her silver eyes narrowing. You find yourself in the presence of a being of unlimited cosmic power, capable of granting your deepest desires, and you want to discuss science. Tom set down his cleaning supplies and pulled up an old lab stool. His initial shock was wearing off, replaced by the familiar calm that came with facing an interesting problem. Actually, yes, he said. You see, what you just did. Emerging from that lamp in a cloud of smoke, floating in midair right now, it violates several fundamental principles of physics. The conservation of mass, for starters. Where did all that smoke come from? And how are you generating enough force to hover without any visible means of propulsion? Rose's confident smile faltered slightly. Most humans would be on their knees by now, either begging for riches or stammering in fear. This janitor was asking about propulsion systems. I am a genie, she said, adding a slight glow to her form for emphasis. I command powers beyond mortal understanding. Magic isn't bound by your simple human science. Tom nodded thoughtfully. That's interesting. Because from where I'm standing, you're either breaking the laws of physics, which would mean our entire understanding of the universe is wrong, or you're operating on principles we haven't discovered yet. Either way, he smiled. That's fascinating. Enough. Rose's voice echoed through the storage room, making the old equipment rattle. I am not here to satisfy your curiosity. You have 3 wishes. That is the deal that has existed for millennia. Make your wishes, mortal, and let us be done with this. Can I have some time to think about my first wish? 24 hours, Rose said, clearly relieved to be back on familiar ground. I will return tomorrow night. I suggest you spend that time thinking about what riches or powers you desire. Her form began to fade. Humans always wish for the same things in the end. Wait, Tom called out. Can I keep the lamp with me? For safekeeping. Rose smiled condescendingly. The lamp is bound to you until your wishes are complete. Keep it, polish it, do whatever you mortals do. Just remember, 24 hours. With that, she vanished in another swirl of silver smoke, leaving Tom alone in the storage room. He picked up the lamp carefully, noticing how its warmth had faded to a gentle pulse, like a heartbeat. The next night, Tom sat in the same storage room, the lamp placed on a cleared workbench. He had spent his day off studying quantum mechanics textbooks and reviewing theoretical physics papers. When Rose appeared in her usual display of smoke and light, she found him waiting with a notebook full of equations. Have you decided on your first wish, mortal? She asked, already imagining the typical requests for wealth, power, or love that humans always made. I have, Tom said quietly. He stood up, looking directly into her silver eyes. I wish to understand how your magic works at a fundamental scientific level. Every principle, every mechanism, every detail of the underlying physics that allows you to do what you do. The silence that followed was absolute. Rose's confident smile vanished, replaced by an expression of pure shock. The silver glow around her flickered like a faulty light bulb. You can't wish for that, she stammered. That's not. Humans don't. Is it against the rules? Tom asked calmly. Does it violate any restrictions on wishes? Rose's mouth opened and closed several times before she finally spoke. No, she whispered. It doesn't. Then I believe you have to grant it, Tom said, picking up his notebook. And I'd like to understand everything, please. No shortcuts. For the first time in several thousand years, Rose felt afraid. Not of the human standing before her, but of what she was about to reveal, and what it might mean for both their species. Very well, she said, her voice barely audible. Wish granted. The storage room filled with blinding silver light as knowledge older than human civilization began pouring into Tom's mind. The knowledge hit Tom like a tidal wave. He staggered back, grabbing the workbench for support as his mind filled with information that no human had ever known. The silver light pulsing from Rose wrapped around him, and in that moment, everything became clear. Oh, Tom whispered, his eyes wide. Oh, it's so simple. It's all so beautifully simple. Rose watched in growing horror as understanding dawned on his face. She had expected his mind to be overwhelmed, to shut down under the weight of knowledge, meant for beings far more advanced than humans. Instead, he was smiling. "You're not magical beings at all," Tom said softly, straightening up. "You're scientists. Extremely advanced ones, but still scientists. Your whole species. You're dimensional engineers." "Stop," Rose commanded, but her voice shook. "You cannot possibly understand." "But I do," Tom interrupted, his eyes bright with excitement. "Your lamps aren't prisons or magical vessels. They're dimensional pocket laboratories. The smoke, the floating, the instant manifestation of wishes. It's all just incredibly advanced quantum manipulation." He began pacing the storage room, talking faster as thousands of years of supposed magic resolved itself into pure science in his mind. "Your species discovered how to fold spacetime on a quantum level. You learned to manipulate matter at its most fundamental state. What we call magic is really just technology so advanced that, like Arthur C. Clarke said, it's indistinguishable from magic." Rose's silver glow flickered violently. "You're just a human. You can't possibly grasp." "The mathematics behind it is beautiful," Tom continued, grabbing his notebook and starting to write. "The way you fold higher dimensions to store matter and energy in the lamps, the quantum entanglement you use to transmit power across vast distances, the way you manipulate probability fields to make wishes come true." His hand moved rapidly across the page, filling it with equations that no human should have been able to comprehend, let alone write. "And the genies themselves. You're not supernatural beings. You're quantum consciousness constructs. Your true forms exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously, which is why you appear to us as smoke and light. You don't actually grant wishes through magic. You use incredibly advanced technology to manipulate reality at its most basic level." Rose sank to the ground, her ability to float forgotten in her shock. For the first time in her existence, she was standing on the same level as a human. "How?" she whispered. "How can you understand this? Even with the knowledge granted by your wish, your mind should not be able to process these concepts." Tom stopped writing and looked at her with sympathy. "Because humans have already been working on these principles. Quantum mechanics, string theory, dimensional physics. We've been laying the groundwork for understanding your magic for over a century. We just hadn't made the final connections yet." He showed her his notebook, now filled with equations that perfectly described the science behind her powers. "Your species spent millennia hiding behind the illusion of magic, thinking humans were too primitive to understand. But we've been catching up." Rose stared at the equations, then at Tom. You're not just a janitor, are you?" Tom shrugged. "I have a PhD in quantum physics. I chose to work as a janitor because it gave me time to think, to study. Sometimes the best way to solve a problem is to look at it from a different angle." He turned to a new page in his notebook. "Now let me explain what I think I could do with this knowledge. For instance, the way you manipulate quantum fields to manifest wishes. With some modifications, we could." "Stop." Rose held up her hands. "Please, I need time to process this. No human was ever supposed to understand. This knowledge, it changes everything." Tom nodded gently. "It does, but change isn't always bad. And speaking of changes," he smiled, "I still have 2 wishes left. And now that I understand how they actually work, I think I know exactly what to wish for." Rose looked at him, real fear showing in her silver eyes. In all her millennia of granting wishes, she had never felt so completely out of control. The human standing before her, calmly writing down the secrets of her species' power, had changed the rules of a game she didn't even know they were playing. And he wasn't finished yet. For the first time in her long existence, Rose found herself lost for words. She watched as Tom continued writing in his notebook, occasionally muttering things like quantum field manipulation and dimensional overlap coefficients. The storage room's dim lighting cast shadows on his face as he worked, but his eyes were bright with understanding. "Would you like me to explain how your appearance shifting works?" Tom asked without looking up. "It's actually quite elegant. You're using quantum superposition to maintain multiple states simultaneously while—" "Stop." Rose's voice cracked with emotion. "Just stop." Tom finally looked up from his notebook. "Is something wrong?" "Wrong." Rose laughed, but it wasn't her usual confident sound. "You're dismantling everything we are. Thousands of years of mystery and power reduced to equations and diagrams." She gestured at his notebook, where complex formulas detailed the exact mechanisms of her powers. "We're supposed to be beings of wonder and magic, not science experiments." Tom set down his pen and looked at her thoughtfully. "Is that why your species pretended to be magical? To maintain a sense of wonder?" "We didn't pretend," Rose snapped, then hesitated. We just never corrected humans' assumptions. It was easier that way. When people think you're magical, they don't ask questions. They don't try to understand. They just accept and obey. And that's what you wanted. Obedience without understanding." Rose opened her mouth to respond, then closed it. She had never had to justify her species' actions before. "Let me show you something interesting," Tom said, turning his notebook toward her. "See this equation here? It describes how you create matter from energy during wish fulfillment. But if you adjust these variables," he scribbled a quick modification, "you could make the process 30% more efficient." "That's impossible," Rose said automatically. Then she looked closer at his calculations. Her silver eyes widened. "How did you?" "Simple optimization," Tom replied. "Once you understand the underlying principles, you can start looking for improvements. Your species has been using the same methods for so long, you stopped looking for better ways." He stood up and walked to one of the old lab tables, brushing away dust to reveal its surface. "For instance, when you materialize objects, you always use a spiral pattern for matter assembly." He drew the pattern in the dust. "But a fractal pattern would be more stable and use less energy." Rose floated closer, despite herself. "You can't just change methods that have worked for millennia." "Why not?" "Science is about constant improvement. Look here." Tom drew another diagram. "Your dimensional folding technique for the lamps. It's brilliant, but it's also thousands of years old. With modern quantum theory, we could create pocket dimensions that are twice as stable using half the energy." Rose stared at the diagrams, her carefully maintained image of superiority crumbling. This human wasn't just understanding their technology, he was improving it. "I need to sit down," she said quietly, and actually used a chair instead of floating. Tom watched her with sympathy. "I know this is difficult. Your species has probably been doing things the same way for so long. Change seems impossible. But that's the beauty of science. There's always room for improvement, always new things to learn. Even for beings like me." Rose asked, looking at her hands where silver light still danced across her skin. "Especially for beings like you," Tom said kindly. "Think about it. You've been granting wishes for thousands of years, but have you ever really understood how you do it? Haven't you ever been curious about the actual mechanics of your powers?" Rose was quiet for a long moment. We were taught not to question. The methods worked, so we just kept using them, generation after generation. "Well," Tom said, picking up his pen again, "maybe it's time to start questioning. For instance, I have a theory about how we could modify the basic wish-granting protocol to—" "The wishes." Rose jumped up, suddenly remembering. "You still have 2 wishes left. And now that you understand our technology." She looked genuinely worried. Tom smiled. "Don't worry. I've had time to think about my next wish very carefully. And I think you'll find it even more interesting than the first one." Rose wasn't sure anything could be more shocking than his first wish. She was about to learn how wrong she was. The old storage room had changed overnight. Tom had brought in several whiteboards, covering them with complex equations and diagrams. Papers filled with calculations were spread across the workbench, and the brass lamp sat in the center of it all, humming softly with its strange energy. Rose appeared in her usual swirl of silver smoke, but there was no theatricality in it this time. She looked at the whiteboards and winced. "You've been busy," she said. "Couldn't sleep," Tom replied, adding a final note to one of his diagrams. "Once I understood the basic principles, I kept seeing new possibilities. Did you know that your quantum field manipulation techniques could be adapted to solve our clean energy problems? The way you convert energy to matter alone could revolutionize." "Stop," Rose interrupted. "Please, you're not supposed to be thinking about using our powers this way. Humans are supposed to wish for money, or love, or power. Simple things." Tom turned to face her. "Is that why your species chose to appear as wish-granting genies? To limit how humans might use your technology?" Rose's silence was answer enough. "Well," Tom said, picking up his notebook, "that brings me to my second wish." He took a deep breath. "I wish to have the ability to replicate and improve upon your technological capabilities." The storage room went completely silent. Even the constant hum of the lamp seemed to pause. "No," Rose whispered. "You can't. That's not. Is it against the rules?" Tom asked calmly. No, but..." Rose's form flickered violently. "You don't understand what you're asking for." "Actually, I do. Thanks to my first wish, I understand exactly what I'm asking for." Tom held up his notebook. "I've spent the last 24 hours working out the theoretical framework. I know how your powers work now. I just need the ability to implement them." Rose began pacing in midair, her silver glow pulsing with anxiety. "But this would give you access to technology thousands of years beyond your civilization's level. You could reshape reality itself. Just like you can," Tom pointed out. "The only difference is I understand how it all works, and I want to make it better." "Better?" Rose stopped pacing. "What do you mean, better?" Tom walked to one of the whiteboards. "Look at this. Your matter conversion process wastes energy because it treats atoms as the smallest building blocks. But if we account for quantum states," he pointed to a complex equation, "we could make the whole process more efficient." "That's..." Rose floated closer to the whiteboard, her scientific curiosity finally overcoming her fear. "That's actually brilliant." "And here," Tom moved to another board, "I've designed a way to improve your dimensional storage systems. The current method creates pocket dimensions that are inherently unstable. But if we apply string theory principles..." Rose stared at his calculations, her silver eyes wide. "This would make the lamps twice as stable." "Exactly." Tom's eyes lit up with excitement. "Don't you see? We could do so much more with this technology if we approached it scientifically instead of treating it like magic." For a long moment, Rose looked between Tom and his calculations. When she finally spoke, her voice was quiet. "You really want this knowledge to improve things, don't you? Not for power or control." "Of course," Tom said. "Knowledge shouldn't be hoarded. It should be understood, improved, and used to help others." Rose straightened up, her form becoming more solid. "Very well. But remember, with this power comes great responsibility." "I understand," Tom said solemnly. "No," Rose said. "I don't think you do. Not yet. But you will." She raised her hands, silver light gathering around them. Second wish granted. The light exploded outward, enveloping Tom. But this time, instead of just understanding flowing into his mind, he felt power flowing into his body. Knowledge became ability. Theory became practice. When the light faded, Tom looked down at his hands. Small sparks of silver energy danced across his fingers, just like Rose's. "Welcome," Rose said quietly, "to a whole new level of science." Tom smiled, already thinking about his third and final wish, a wish that would change everything. Not just for him, but for all genies and humans alike. The storage room crackled with energy. Silver sparks danced between the whiteboards as Tom tested his newly granted powers, creating and dissolving small objects in the air. Each time he used his abilities, the equations he had written seemed to glow faintly, as if the mathematics themselves were coming alive. "Remarkable," Tom muttered, watching a small sphere of pure energy orbit his hand. "The quantum field responds to conscious direction, but it follows precise mathematical principles. It's like having a supercomputer wired directly into my brain." Rose watched him nervously. In all her years of granting wishes, she had never seen a human adapt to genie powers so quickly. Most beings would be drunk on the power by now, trying to reshape continents or build golden palaces. But Tom was taking measurements and making notes. "Your third wish," she said, trying to hide her anxiety. "You still have one left." "Yes," Tom said, letting the energy sphere dissolve. "But before I make it, I need to ask you something." He turned to face her. "How many of you are there? How many genies are trapped in lamps across the universe?" Rose's glow dimmed slightly. "Thousands, maybe millions. We were an entire civilization once. Before the binding. The binding. Long ago, our people grew too powerful, too arrogant. We began interfering with younger civilizations, playing gods." Rose's voice was heavy with old pain. "A group of our scientists created the lamp system as a way to limit our influence. We would only be able to interact with other beings through wishes, with strict rules and limitations." "But it went wrong, didn't it?" Tom asked gently. Rose nodded. "The binding spread like a virus through our quantum network. Soon, almost our entire species was trapped. Only a few remained free. And she looked away. They chose to leave, to observe from a distance. They left us here, granting wishes, century after century." Tom was quiet for a moment, absorbing this information. Then he walked to the lamp on the workbench and picked it up, studying its intricate patterns with new understanding. "These patterns," he said, "they're not decorative, are they? They're equations, the mathematical formulas that create your prison." "Yes," Rose whispered, "written in the language of quantum mechanics itself. Unbreakable. Eternal." "Nothing is eternal," Tom said, setting down the lamp. "Especially not prison cells." He straightened up, his decision made. "I'm ready for my third wish." Rose braced herself. With his understanding and power, he could wish for almost anything in the universe. Immortality. Godhood. Absolute power. "I wish," Tom said clearly, "for all genies to be freed from their dimensional prisons, with their powers intact but no longer bound by the lamp system or the rules of wish-granting." The lamp fell off the workbench with a clang that seemed to echo through multiple dimensions. Rose's form flickered violently, her silver glow becoming almost blinding. You can't," she gasped. "The binding is too strong. Even with your understanding, even with your new powers." "Actually," Tom said, picking up his notebook, "I can. Remember how I improved your quantum field manipulation, combined with my understanding of the lamp's prison mechanics?" He showed her a page of complex equations. "We just need to create a cascading quantum effect that will ripple through all connected dimensional spaces." Rose stared at his calculations, hope warring with fear on her face. But why? Why would you use your last wish for this?" "Because knowledge shouldn't be a prison," Tom said simply. "And neither should those who possess it." He raised his hands, silver energy gathering around them, just as it did for Rose. But this time, the energy was focused through the lens of his equations, guided by both science and compassion. "Third wish granted," Rose whispered, the traditional words taking on new meaning as the storage room filled with blinding light. The lamp began to shake, its patterns glowing with increasing intensity. Through the quantum network that connected all Genie lamps, a wave of change began to spread, carrying with it the mathematics of freedom. And somewhere in the vast cosmos, thousands of lamps began to break, releasing their prisoners into a new age of understanding. 3 months had passed since that night in the storage room. The old basement of Fuller Quantum Research Center had been transformed into something that looked like a cross between an advanced physics lab and a magical workshop. Silver light danced across walls covered in equations, and the air hummed with the sound of quantum fields being manipulated. Tom sat at his workbench, now wearing a proper lab coat instead of his janitor's uniform. He watched as Rose demonstrated a new technique for dimensional folding to a group of recently freed Genies. Her silver form moved gracefully as she explained the principles, no longer floating to appear impressive, but standing firmly on the ground. The human method requires more initial energy, she was saying, but the stability increase makes it worth the extra effort. Now, if you'll observe the quantum field matrix. Tom smiled, remembering how different Rose had been just a few months ago. The change in her wasn't just about being freed from the lamp. It was about finding a new purpose. Dr. Miller, a young Genie named Blue, they had started using simple names after freedom, approached his workbench. We finished analyzing those energy conversion formulas you developed. The results are, well, they're amazing. Good amazing or bad amazing? Tom asked, though he could tell from Blue's excited glow that it was good news. We can power entire cities with the energy output from a single quantum conversion chamber. It's completely clean, completely safe, and, Blue paused, his silver form brightening with enthusiasm. We never even thought to try it this way. We were so focused on maintaining our traditional methods that we missed countless possibilities for improvement. Tom nodded. This had been a common theme as more Genies were freed. They discovered that their powers, treated as unchangeable magic for millennia, could be enhanced and improved through scientific understanding. Speaking of improvements, Rose said, finishing her demonstration and joining them, the quantum communication network is finally online. We're receiving messages from Genies across the galaxy. They all want to learn the new methods. And how are they adapting to freedom? Tom asked. Rose smiled, a genuine expression that had replaced her old condescending smirk. Better than we could have hoped. Some are joining human research institutions. Others are establishing schools to teach both humans and Genies about quantum mechanics. A few are even talking about rebuilding our old civilization, but differently this time. No more playing gods, just sharing knowledge and working together. And those who created the binding in the first place, the ones who left, Tom had often wondered about them. They've made contact, Rose said quietly. They want to come back, to learn from us, from humans. She shook her head in amazement. They never imagined that being bound to humanity would lead to such advances in our understanding. Tom stood up from his workbench, looking around the lab. In one corner, a human physicist was deep in discussion with a Genie about string theory. In another, a group of Genies were learning about human scientific methods while teaching humans about quantum manipulation. The air was filled with the excitement of discovery and collaboration. You know, Rose said, watching the scene with him, when you first made that wish to understand our powers, I thought it was the end of everything we were. I was wrong. She turned to look at him. It was just the beginning. That's the thing about science, Tom replied. It's never about endings. It's always about beginnings, about finding new questions to ask. Speaking of questions, Blue interrupted, holding up a tablet filled with equations. I've been thinking about your theory on multidimensional energy transfer. What if we combined it with the traditional Genie method of wish fulfillment? Not for granting wishes anymore, but for large-scale matter conversion. Tom grinned. Now that's an interesting question. Rose, what do you think? I think, Rose said, her silver eyes sparkling with curiosity rather than power, that we have a lot of work to do. And I wouldn't have it any other way. As they gathered around the tablet, discussing new possibilities and improvements, the last remnants of the old brass lamp sat forgotten on a shelf. It was no longer needed. Its purpose had been served. In its place was something far more powerful than any wish-granting magic. the combined knowledge of two species working together to understand the true wonders of the universe. And somewhere in the vast cosmos, other lamps gathered dust as their former prisoners explored a new kind of freedom, one based not on power or magic, but on understanding, collaboration, and the endless possibilities of science.